Hello and welcome into the KE Report. Shad and Corey here, getting an update from Minera Alamos, traded on the TSX.V under the ticker MAI, and on the OTCQX under the ticker MAIFF. We're joined today with the president of Minera Alamos, Doug Ramshaw. And Doug, always great to get you on the show. It's been about 5 months since we've had you on, so it's nice to get an update here with a key transaction you announced to the marketplace October 28th, and that is that Minera Alamos is acquiring Sabre Gold, traded on the TSX under the ticker SGLD and on the OTCQB under the ticker SGLDF. Now, this brings in the Copperstone Project, the Copperstone Mine, a prior producing mine in Arizona, into the stable of projects for Minera Alamos, a near-term development and production project for the company. Walk us through the key transaction highlights, but also the synergies here of bringing in this new project to the fold.
For sure. Thanks for having me on, guys. We actually have been looking at this project. I think Darren first visited it in 2015. We had always been looking. I remember interviews I did in 2019 where you want to be multi-mine, you want to be multi-jurisdiction. It's a natural step of a company's kind of de-risking profile. I'm very happy to say that when we were finally able to execute, it was at a time of shifting sentiment in Mexico from the grossly negative of the last couple of years to a much more positive sentiment shift in Mexico, because this was meant to complement the Mexican base, not take away from it. And I think we achieved that in a pro forma company, which would be 86-14 in breakdown between the two. So a bit of a kind of a tuck-in acquisition. That was important for me in particular, thinking and speaking to our shareholders, who I know want exposure to the torquiness of our Mexican gold production that, is planned from Cerro De Oro and Fortuna and Santana, and not lose that by doing anything hugely dilutive. So we viewed this as a very accretive, complementary tuck-in acquisition that also would allow us to develop a mine like Cerro De Oro in Mexico at the same time as Copperstone in Arizona. And we haven't gone to the far-flung regions of the world to add this second jurisdiction. We're literally just to the north of Sonora in Arizona. So, we've known about it for a very long time. We've always seen the challenges they had and why it's not been in production. And one of those was gold price. Another was the project was overly encumbered, and that's been resolved in the last couple of years. And finally, really, there was just never the team. So it checked all the boxes for us, and I was very pleased with how the news was received in the first couple of days. Obviously, we've succumbed, like the whole sector, to the drawdowns from what were pretty toppy market conditions, October 22nd, 23rd-ish, where most of these stocks peaked. So many of them have the exact same chart pattern that we've had for the last couple of weeks. So to announce an acquisition in the middle of all that, at a time where typically a company that announces an acquisition gets hit, I was very happy that the first 2 days of trading, we were actually flat. That was a sign to me that the market at large was very approving of this deal. And, we look forward to it complementing the existing stable in Mexico.
So let's give a little bit more color to this Copperstone asset then. The total resource is 300,000 contained ounces in the measured and indicated, plus just short of 200,000 ounces in the inferred. There was a 2023 PEA that really fits into, I think, Minera Alamos's model here of a low CapEx and a high IRR. Take us through those PEA numbers that attracted you to this asset.
Yeah, well, the PA, it's a recent PA. It doesn't actually take into account all of the reduction in encumbrances there. And I think also the PA, and in our press release, we put this map or this photo straight from the PA that highlighted one missing part of their surface infrastructure. All the crushing equipment, power, everything is there, including all the, largely all the underground development that's needed. But it was missing a mill. Well, as luck would have it, we've had this mill sitting oversized for the initial Fortuna plan. So it's been sitting in Val-d'Or in 26 sea cans for years now. That we had the exact mill that would fit what they were missing from the surface infrastructure point of view. So we are confident that that capex number, which is very modest, 35 million US in the PA, is certainly not going up. And we've seen lots of projects which have been seen very inflationary capex overruns. And the question is, how much can we shave off with our mill? 40 to 50% of that PA capex number was plant and processing related. Do we save $18 million or, $15 million by having our mill? No. But can we save $5 million off that capex number, or is it 7 or 8? We're still kind of working through those numbers now, but we certainly think that there's a scope to reduce that capex still further. The other thing is, this is it's an underground mine. We actually have, I know everyone thinks of us as open pit heap leach guys in Mexico. We actually have a lot of underground expertise on the board right now. And through some of that guidance, we'll be able to bring in the right team for this in Arizona. But this is almost a kind of, if you have an underground mine, you kind of want it to be either flat lying or vertical or subvertical. And the worst kind of scenario is a situation where it's shallowly dipping. You typically have to involve more expensive mining approach, a cut and fill approach to it, which is there's certainly a higher cost mining method. Well, some of the structures down there are actually very wide, and we don't think that the whole approach needs to be done via cut and fill. So we think that there are a number of ways we can improve the economics of that baseline PEA that will be favorable, notwithstanding obviously a higher gold price environment. I like the fact that it's an $1,800 base case because I think we should build all our mines so that they can actually work and make money at $1,800 or $1,600 gold. And sure, take advantage of higher gold prices when they come. So, yeah, I think there was a really good corporate gap fill here. We had personnel, we'd seen a rising gold price. They were struggling on a number of fronts, and we were able to execute something which we think was a fair outcome for their shareholders and their creditors, and a very complementary addition to Mexico for our shareholders that actually allows us. I mean, I mentioned positive sentiment. I think we'll start seeing, even as late this year, permit-related news in Mexico. I mean, Alamos Gold have highlighted in a formal press release a permit amendment that they want for their new underground PDA deposit. They're expecting by year end. I think this enthusiasm that we've seen in some kind of Mexico permit proxy stocks in the last few months still needs to have that follow through of, is there something actually permit related that you can kind of hang your hat on? I think late this year and certainly into the first part of 2025, you're going to see that. But regardless of where Mexico is, we see a clear path for how we can have, how and when we can have Copperstone into production and be in a position to have a dual track development of Cerro De Oro when those permits drop as well. So, I think 2025 sets up as a very exciting year for our shareholders, where they will have a sense of self-determination with regard to Copperstone's advancement, and then this kind of starting to see, the follow through of this positive sentiment in Mexico with companies, and it won't necessarily be, Minera first, but as we start to see these other companies get their permit-related news out there, we will benefit as one of the kind of permit proxy stocks. So, yeah, it shapes up. I'm glad we're getting this consummated right around the end of this year. I think there's a lot to look forward to in 2025.
Well, Doug, let's dig into this a little bit deeper. I've kind of got two comments in one that you can address in tandem. I heard some feedback right after the transaction. They're like, they're getting away from open pit mining because they want to go underground because of the open pit challenges Mexico had, which really isn't the case. And as you highlighted, your team has a strong bench strength in underground mining as well as open pit. But the other thing was the jurisdictional de-risking by moving to Arizona as opposed to Mexico. And you've maintained in some other discussions I've heard you have on this that you really can have a dual track approach to Cerro De Oro and Copperstone at the exact same time, permits depending. So maybe talk to the dual track approach you could take, and that really this is just complementing the portfolio, not a running away from Cerro De Oro as some people maybe assumed.
Yeah, I think for those people, there are always people that will try to look for the negative in anything. And so I was more than prepared to hear those people out, but they may have had a stronger argument in August or September when peak Mexico gloom after the elections was there. But it just simply isn't the case. And, I'm glad that we made this announcement. If things had come together earlier in the year, we might have been making this announcement at a time when those kinds of arguments could have held more apparent water. But as luck would have it, sentiment had shifted in Mexico. You've heard me countless things talking very positively about Mexico, and that's because of what we're hearing on the ground. That's because, it's not what I've been saying that's shifted Mexico sentiment. There's other bellwether stocks that are moving. I was doing a Twitter Spaces one day where our stock moved up, as did a whole basket of Mexican developers because of news coming out of Mexico, and I had to break away from that Twitter Spaces because I had market surveillance on the line, and I needed to explain to them, no, there was nothing material from a Minera standpoint, and I started listing off companies. I'm pretty sure that he had either made calls or was going to have to make calls because everything had moved up on that. It's fortuitous because I think it really negates those negative Nellies that literally will look for the negative in anything or try to spin something to the negative, which some people tried to do for sure. This was an opportunistic deal for us that is very beneficial on every metric for Minera. We increased our global inventory of gold by 35%. We increase our measured and indicated resources by 60%. We add 40,000 ounces of complementary production, which to our base is close to 30%, all for 14% equity dilution. So on any metric, this was a very accretive deal, and I'm just happy we were able to do it at a time where, this is not nervousness. And in reality, those same negative voices that hadn't even mentioned a pivot to, like, they can often be hindsight armchair warriors, right? So, earlier this year, it's like, oh, they should have shifted to the permitted Fortuna years ago. It's like, well, they weren't saying that 2 years ago. It's nice to look back in hindsight and say, but circumstances were different. Our plan, we're not going to be reactionary. It made sense to develop Cerro De Oro second. And the reality is, if we pivoted to Fortuna prematurely and then the Cerro De Oro permits drop, you're not building two things in Mexico at the same time. And arguably, with Copperstone, we are ready, and we see a path for Copperstone from deal close to when it can be in production. And as and when, because I don't think it's an if, Cerro De Oro permits drop, well, what do you think our Mexico team are going to be doing? They're not going to be sitting on the bleachers watching the team in Arizona build, finish off the completion of Copperstone and get it into production. We have a team in Mexico that can, on a parallel path, be developing Cerro De Oro. So, that's something that this transaction actually provides us I call it in our new deck, this dual track development path, because it genuinely offers that, where we wouldn't have had that path if we were singly focused in Mexico.
So, Doug, you are right. This continues to be a market where it is better for companies to acquire ounces in the ground rather than go out and try to explore for them themselves, especially with that development path. But let's talk capital management then, because you have this pipeline of assets that you can build and that you want to build in series. What do you do with capital? How does the company stand right now? And how do you go about funding one of these builds when you do move ahead with them?
Well, our biggest focus, and this is one of the beauties of development assets, is it's more of a project finance component to this. So we obviously have a funding package in place for Cerro De Oro. So we are talking with our existing lenders about providing flexibility on our current funding package to bring Copperstone under its same umbrella. But we've also got secondary lenders that are very close to the company that are very interested in Copperstone. So it may be that our existing funding package stays in place for receipt of the Cerro De Oro permits, and we have a completely new lender for Copperstone, or there's a combination of the two. But that is one of the beauties of these projects. They are much more conversations with on the project finance side. So this very much will be between now and proposed deal close, which would be about third week of January. I would hope very quickly after that deal closes, we'll be able to demonstrate the project finance relationships and construct of those terms that will provide the capacity for the dual track development. Because genuinely we want that as shareholders. We want both of these moving at the same time. It's a much easier conversation if I just say, well, we'll build one and then the other one. It's just like, but actually I would be looking to expand the project finance side of things to ensure that we have that capacity for what we anticipate to be a kind of in parallel approach to the development of these two mines.
Well, Doug, let's pan back big picture and bring Santana into the equation here and just talk about how the production profile can change over the next 12 to 24 months. You made a comment off mic that you're kind of a quasi-producer right now, and I would say you're a legitimate producer at Santana, but I think most people positioned in Minera Alamos are looking at the growth profile. So walk us through how the production profile will change when you have Santana moving along as slated, but also bringing in Cerro De Oro and Copperstone. What does the company look like in that kind of an environment?
Yeah, I mean, Santana, we have this 12-month mining sequence that we've embarked on that, produces, will mine and stack about 25,000 ounces out of that Nicho main zone pit, which is a few 100,000 ounces in size. So a small part of that resource over the next 12 months. It's getting it back on track. I think we mentioned in August that Q3 was very much about mining and stacking, less about production, but getting mining and stacking going again because it's that fresh ore on the pad that leads to the higher production that comes with then leaching that fresh material. And I think we guided in August that we expect Q3 to have seen mining and stacking rates which exceed the entirety of 2023 just in the Q3 quarter. So, a step change in terms of mining activity at Santana. But Santana is a relatively small mine. Can it get bigger? Yes, but I think, right now it's just about being able to get it to being a kind of a consistent 20,000 ounce a year type producer. And, we're effectively kind of going through a new ramp up with the new pit there. So feels like Santana is always in perpetual ramp up mode. But I think that ramp up took hold in Q3 of this year, which was good. And even for Santana bodes well for 2025. But when you look at it, and the reason I'm kind of almost call us a quasi-producer is I don't think you invest in Minera because of Santana. You invest in Minera because of the pipeline, and the pipeline is far more meaningful in terms of production. And to put it into context, I mean, if Cerro De Oro and Copperstone are developed on a dual track approach and could both come on stream early in 2026, on a forward run rate, that's about 100,000 ounces of gold production from those two mines, which makes Santana at 20,000 ounces, not exactly a rounding error, but it puts scale in perspective. Copperstone's twice this kind of first iteration of Santana. Cerro De Oro is 3 times that. Combined, they're 5 times the production of Santana, and that's the real future driver of the company, for sure. Santana provides some useful, and I think it will get back to kind of running in at a mine operating profit in Q4 as that production from this increased mining and stacking activity kind of always lags a little because of the nature of the leach cycle. So it's useful to have it as a ancillary funding source and support for taking on project finance for your other operations. You've got this one, but it's small in comparison to Cerro De Oro and I mean the pit, the resources at Cerro De Oro are close to 4 times those of the Nicho main zone pit. Even Copperstone is already 2.5 times that, and there's we don't really talk about it. We didn't really address it too much in the press release. There's a lot of exploration potential at Copperstone. We're viewing it right now as this initial 6-year mine life. And the good thing about that with the high IRR that Corey mentioned, which even at $2,000 gold is 71%, not taking into account our ability to reduce CapEx and some of the operating costs, you got very quick payback on it. So even on a relatively short initial mine life of 6 years, you've still got a lot of runway there to be adding additional mine life behind it, using cash flow from that operation once it's paid back its debt, to actually be able to expand it beyond that. Sabre on their website have a great little YouTube video that on the investor page, which kind of takes you underground a bit, shows you the 3D block model, kind of highlights these parallel structures that have had drill holes in, barely any drill holes in it, and have got sniffs of grade and everything else. It's by no means a finite resource there. So yeah, we see it as a really nice complementary production asset, but with growth beyond what was presented in that PEA.
So Doug, wrap us up then with all these, I guess, potential catalysts ahead of the company. What's coming? What are some of the near-term catalysts investors can look out for?
I think actually, given our Mexico focus, I think investors want to take a very close look at, the positive shift in sentiment down in Mexico, because there's probably a half dozen companies that have permit-related news in Mexico, which is a real driver for us as one of the proxy plays there. We'll be able to show how Santana is improving its operating performance, which is obviously important. Cerro De Oro, we're preparing for, permit receipt, hopefully, in H1 of 2025. H1 of 2025 will be busy because we'll consummate the Sabre deal. We'll be looking to relocate our mill down there and start some of the early work on getting the mill ready. And even, I think there might be a few things that we're planning to do, as we say in our deck, consummate a third asset that can go into the copper sub that we've got, which I think allows us to look at how we spin out or what separate copper vehicle we have to the benefit of our shareholders too. So 2024 was, after what was very much a lost year in 2023. I think 2024 was always a bit of a transition year from that lost year to a very active year in 2025. I think we've transitioned pretty well so far in 2024. The things that we had control of, we've achieved. Like, we have 6 catalysts in our deck, and there's 3 green check marks by 3 points there, all of which were things we had control over. There were 3 that remain unchecked, which are outside factors, permit related and the like. And I think we've got fresh catalysts for 2025, and I think that will include getting check marks and all the things that were outside of our control in 2024. And I think that promises to provide a year where this patience of our shareholder base and support of our shareholder base gets rewarded as some of these other outside factors that we wish for everyone involved came sooner kind of come to fruition. So yeah, I mean, right now it's busy as we plan for all the necessary shareholder votes on the Sabre side and everything to consummate the Sabre transaction and be prepared for a very active 2025.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there, Doug. But yeah, a lot of catalyst on the horizons. Some of those, the company's moving along. Some of those outside factors. Hopefully you get some of those green check marks as we roll into 2025. But there's going to be a lot of news coming out of Minera Alamos. And if people listening in want to follow along with that news, definitely click on the link below this interview. Takes you right over to the Minera Alamos website, straight to their news section. So you too can follow along and you can sign up for the news updates there. Doug, keep us posted as some of these other milestones are hit. We'll get you back on for an update. And as always, looking forward to our next conversation.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks again.